Giorno. You're listening to Going, where God is at work. A podcast where cross-cultural workers discuss everything from faith and fear to finances and faux pas. We're walking out our call to ministry in faraway places and happy to have you join us on the journey. I'm your host, Jesse Pauly, missions leader serving in Rome, Italy. And I'm here with Alessandro Di Leonardo, church planner in Cisterna di Latina, and Jenn Williamson, our missiologist who lives and works in Lyon. Welcome back, guys. How's everybody doing?
Doing well.
Happy to see the sun.
We were just in Portugal, and man, I was expecting it to be warm and sunny, and it was like cloudy and rainy and cold the whole time we were there. In fact, we came back sick, and I'm blaming it on the cold weather because it was quite warm here in Rome, and then we go there, it's cold. Now we come back to the warm. Oh man, guys, it's good to be back. Today we're going to tackle a big topic, but before we get into that, why don't we just kind of open it up and talk a little bit about some of the ways that we've adapted to the culture that we're in, or how we might prefer things. We're all American, so how we would have prefer American ways. I don't care who jumps in first, but let's just share a little bit kind of about that whole assimilation, I guess we could summarize it as.
Yeah, for me, two are, I guess, they go back to traditional ways of doing things, and then one is kind of actually new. So one is the fact, how we are Americans, we're precise, or at least not. We're precise in relative to some Europeans. I heard the Germans are really precise. I have German friends, and I was actually shocked. But anyways, I've learned to be loose on time, not super loose, because I also have a Filipino background, and they're very loose. But I've learned to be more Italian living here in Italy, so loose on the time. I love entering a home and saying permesso, which is asking permission to enter. I just love that, and I do it all the time. And I catch myself also doing that when I go back to the States. I just think it's such a cool way.
In Italian or in English?
No, I'll say in Italian. It would be weird. Permission.
So what does that mean, you guys? I'm not familiar with that custom.
So it's the word is permission, but you say permesso, and it's sort of like, do I have permission to enter your home? Even though you literally invited me to come, even before I step in, I kind of just say permesso, and it's like announcing yourself to coming in, not as a grandiose way, but actually as a way of humbling yourself, kind of like, do I have the privilege of coming in? So I love doing that. So I do that all the time. Cool. And then the last one, if I could add one more, would be this more modern. I absolutely love voice messages, specifically WhatsApp, but in any form. I hate typing. So the fact that I can leave my thoughts in a voice format, I love it. I don't know if it's picked up yet in the States, but before I left, it wasn't a thing. And so that's one of the things that I've adapted to the European ways, because I know a lot of Europeans do that too.
Oh, I got to piggyback off that one, because that's for me too. The WhatsApp, the use of WhatsApp in general, I really like, because in America, I remember always getting in trouble for being the one guy that caused the green bubble and wasn't an iPhone and didn't have the iMessaging, and WhatsApp just gets rid of that because we're all on equal ground when we're on WhatsApp. And so I agree, in the audio messages are another thing for me too. Yeah, I would say as far as some cultural things, so something that has stood out to me ever since I was really young is, I think it has to do with the fact that there were wars fought on this land, and big wars, but people tend to preserve and try and keep their things and make them last as long as they possibly can. So I had a friend, and we were over at his house, and he was showing us this camera that he had uses and stuff as a hobby. And long story short, every time he repackages it back into the original packaging, the original box, it's all tattered and beat up from how many times he's opened and closed it, but like he wants to preserve that and have it last as long as it can. And whenever I go back home and see how quickly we buy and get rid of things, I'm like, oh,
that's good.
But yeah, what about you, Jen?
My favorite thing, one of my favorite things is a duvet, and this is a lot of Europe too, where you just have a duvet that has a duvet cover, and your bed is just a fitted sheet and then the duvet. And then you change the duvet, whether it's summer or winter, to be warmer or colder, but there's not like a layer of sheets and blankets and a comforter and all of those things. And I hate, like, now in the States when you go in bed there and you have to sleep with all of these different layers. It makes me crazy. I love just having one thing at night to cover me and to keep me the temperature that I want to be. So I'm all about the duvet. And I really, the French eat 3 meals a day, and the largest meal is lunch. And there's not really there's no snacking, and you never eat on the go. You never are like walking down the street, maybe with an ice cream cone or a crepe, but in general, you don't eat on the go. You don't drink on the go. When you eat, you sit down and you eat and you enjoy a meal. And it is its own thing. It's even like on road trips, people don't like drive through. You stop, you eat, and then you get going again. I really love eating that way now, and I really love also having our largest meal at lunch.
Jesse is our multinational person who understands all these things. You guys can't see it, but he's nodding. I have no idea what a duvet is. Is it a blanket?
You know, like when you have the comforter inside the like sack, like it's like the sack that you put the big fluffy thing inside.
Okay.
That's what the duvet is. So
and they're not all made equally.
Okay.
Some of them, they have like nice buttons and you can button the inside filling to the top and bottom. Others have zippers. The zippers ones don't work very well.
No. I like the ones that have what they call the chimney at the bottom in French. I don't know what you call it in other languages, but it's just this long, like, it narrows on the bottom end and then it's an open hole. But what happens is when you get the duvet and then you tuck that bottom chimney part under the mattress, so it stays, the cover stays on you and where it's supposed to be and doesn't move. Yeah.
I learned something new.
This is great, guys. I really enjoyed this conversation, and now I'm sitting here going, and now we have to transition somehow to colonialism. But we will do it nonetheless. This was awesome, though. That was a really good one. I think we differ on the duvet one, Jen. We do use it because we're here in Europe, but we wrestle with it. We prefer having a fitted sheet and a top sheet and all that kind of fun stuff. So maybe we just have
give it a few years. You'll get there.
So anyways, yes, it's all fun and laughter now as we talk about duvets, but we are going to transition into our topic. Needless to say, we've been working through Jen's dissertation, and one of the things that she tackled was this idea of colonialism and missions and missionaries historically, how this has intermixed. And so today we're going to get into the good, the bad, the ugly of missions historically and colonialism, and even today, what it looks like today. But bear with us. This is a conversation. We're just three people fleshing out this conversation. And so we might say things that you don't agree with or that you do agree with. And feel free to leave a comment later. Write to us. Let us know your thoughts. But I'm going to hand it over to Jen. That's going to kind of set us up with a little bit of context, and then we'll get at it.
Yeah. So historically, we know that some missionary efforts were enmeshed with the tragedy of colonialism. There was this idea of conquering foreign lands and foreign peoples that often enmeshed with royalty, particularly in Europe. The church was already in bed with them, and so there was this concept that as the king conquers new lands and gains new people and new resources that he can command, the church would go in and evangelize them and as we know in Europe, when a king changed religions from Catholicism to Protestantism or whatever, it was the whole country was commanded to do the same. And so there was the same idea as Europeans conquered new lands. The church would thereby be considered growing. And some of that is just intentionally not not the way I think God planned for the gospel to go forth and to be propagated. And sometimes, there were missionaries that inadvertently cooperated and went along, or at least saw, oh, the door is opening to this new place. We're going to go and share the gospel without even considering the ramifications of power and resources and exploitation. And some participated in it to an extent, and saw the growth or the expansion of a nation as an opportunity to grow and expand the church in a way of gaining more power, sometimes earning favor with God, things that are not really associated with the real call to go and make disciples.
Mm.
And so, I wonder, you guys, what do you think of when you think of this idea of missionaries in the midst of colonialism or their participation with colonialism? What kinds of things come to mind if we talk about that?
I mean, I think for me, just the first thought that was coming to mind is how much our I'm hesitating because it's kind of a hot topic now, even, but how much our faith becomes intermixed with our nationality, that then
Yeah.
comes intermixed with our identity somehow, and how all that kind of gets mixed together. And then,
Yeah.
and then when we, or when missionaries went out, how much they thought they were, they confused, I think, maybe intentionally, like you're saying, maybe unintentionally as well, their different aspects of life with really things that weren't the gospel, that weren't essential to the gospel. And so added on this baggage, their cultural baggage, that's kind of the first thing that comes to mind. I don't know why, but sometimes I know this is just my own struggle probably, or maybe others as well, but I it's hard for me to think like, man, they were doing it intentionally, even though I'm sure there were people doing it intentionally, but that's just a hard pill to swallow, that there are people leveraging colonialism, or yeah, conquering nations and places with bad intent.
Yeah.
Right.
When I think, I mean, that question, actually, I've never thought about it until we decided to do this. It's not something that I think about often. But a quote that you guys probably have heard, by Desmond Tutu, when he says, the missionaries came to Africa, they had the Bible and we had the land. They said, let us pray. We closed their eyes, and when we opened them, we had the Bible and they had the land. So that's like what I think about the extreme, right? But then,
Right.
one of the things that when I first became a Christian, 2009, the thing that broke my heart right away is realizing how many people were deceived of being a Christian. Like, because I had come to Christ and then finding out that there was actually a lot of people who claimed to be Christian. Now, this is not, again, like Jesse was saying, to excuse, to kind of say, well, those weren't really Christians who were doing those bad things. But I do think, and even having read some books, not deep into it, where there was, especially on missionary books, even today, where people are going into the Amazon, there's always this contrast of the ones who are actually following Jesus and the ones who seem to, this being their family heritage of being missionaries. It's what everybody was doing. It was a very Christianese time where like countries were claiming to be Christians and doing things in the name of God. So we do have to kind of acknowledge that stuff. Again, this is not to tone it down and give excuse, but I do think uh,
Yeah.
Jesse is onto something when he says that, it's hard to kind of say that someone who really was following Christ was actually doing those things. Could they have been mistaken? Could they have made horrible things? I do think that can have
Right.
happened and has happened. But I think also in the other side, I would like to realize I do think that a lot of times history is being written to those who made the mistakes, and we're carrying the name, but weren't really carrying the real name.
Which we'll never know. But I was just going to say, those are things, the nominal side of it is the hardest part, because we can only go with what people tell us they are.
Exactly.
And I think there's a distinction to be made there too between like individual mission efforts. Not that we should go off on our own and do our own thing, but I mean, if we talk about individual missionaries and what they did and how they brought the gospel versus institutional efforts to convert the natives, if you will, or to plant a flag of, you know, so there's some differentiation there as well. I think that a distinction can be made. And Jesse,
Yeah.
also to your point about the whether we're bringing a political system or not, it's really tricky because when you look at the West, a lot of the reason that the political systems exist that do that, for example, value human life, therefore create hospitals, believe that people, people reflect the image of God, therefore let's educate them and have schools. Those efforts, those political systems that now we just think of as normal, secular Western ways of being, were actually rooted in Christianity. They were rooted in the gospel. And so there's a reason that those things do get conflated to an extent. And but it's a matter of which comes first, the chicken or the egg. Is our faith influencing how we live and how we treat people, or are we taking how we treat people and making statements about then who we are and how good we are and all of those things, and our way of doing it being best. So there's really a lot of nuance here.
Yeah, and there's, I think the first thing, like we've kind of mentioned here, is some of the harmful things, the difficulties, or not difficulties, sorry, but like the negative aspects, let's say, of of not only the country and the people that are that were being colonized, but also on the formation of the national identities of the colonizers and those that were going out. But just because colonization was happening at the same time as missionary efforts, and this, they were getting meshed in some ways together, does that mean, we kind of already a little bit alluded to this idea, but does that mean that all missionaries were colonizers? And I think to your point too, I would add on to this question, Jen, the idea of like there's a difference between the individual and the movement, or the the institutions setting out and supporting this.
There's a really great research by a Danish woman named Karen Valagara. I'm probably saying her last name wrong. That really helps me nuance this. We will link her journal article in the show notes, but it's called "Were Christian Missionaries Colonizers?" And she doesn't deny some of the colonistic tendencies and outcomes of missionary efforts, but she's one who, like, her research has indicated that in India, for example, missionaries were often the ones that stood up against hostile colonial governments and stood for their local brothers and sisters against those powers that were seeking to dominate them. And there's lots of evidence and stories about this. And so I think as humans, particularly in this world, there's something in us. I think it's our survival instinct that wants to be able to label things black or white, good or bad, right or wrong. But much of our human experience has to be nuanced. And I think this is true of missions as well. It's just hard to label it all right or wrong, good or bad.
Yeah. I see evidence of this in the scripture, maybe more in the sense that when for example, we have Peter, who was one of the first people to evangelize to the non-Jew. He had the opportunity to go to the centurion, the God-fearer, but then even in his desire to follow the Lord, we see him that in Galatians 2, Paul had to rebuke him because he was swayed uh, by the people who wanted to have the Christian be circumcised, the Judaizers. And so in a way, they were trying to colonize, to kind of say, this is what you need to do. And Peter was swayed by that, and Paul had to address that. And even realizing that we could even say that a lot of missionaries were swayed. They kind of didn't think twice about the idea of, oh, maybe this is wrong, as opposed to, oh, there's a boat going there. I need to go there to share Jesus. And so I'll follow that boat. I'll jump on that boat, not realizing that boat was going there to exploit people. They're going to provide me housing, they're going to provide me meals. And so I'm going there to share the love of Jesus. While at the same time, the people who are bringing you there are doing harmful things. And I think Peter was in that dilemma. Thankfully, we see God's using Paul. When we think about all this, I think about kind of what we talked about. I think it was 2 episodes ago where we talked about the idea of contextualizing. For me, this seems like it's the opposite, where we are trying to have them, the people, contextualize, where we go to a place
Mm.
and they have to conform to what we
Yes.
understand, as opposed to the other way, where we should try to figure out what's the best way to bring Christ and
Yes.
contextualize and speak their language, as opposed to, hey, you have to learn my language.
That's so good, Alessandro. Or you have to dress like me, or you have to have the same understanding of modesty as I do, or if we go really far, the same, political system as I have. Or yeah, that's so good. We can be so tempted to bring with our faith our cultural lenses, just like Peter and circumcision, which was so connected for the Jews because their religion was so enmeshed with their culture and with their political identity. They really had to work hard to tease out what must be bundled together to be a follower of Christ and what actually is not essential and can we be different on.
Yeah, I think that's the hardest thing, right? Because like your identity when you get saved is shaken. It's completely changed. There's a reason why Jesus referred to it as rebirth.
Yeah, right.
And so then you question, at least as a new believer, you can start to question everything about yourself because especially depending on, I think, your age and at what point in your life you become a believer. I know for
Mm-hmm.
me in my teens, I just remember some of them were silly questions, but some of them were legitimate. It was like, well, if I don't believe this, can I listen to this kind of music anymore? Um, can I go to this restaurant, or can I was asking if I could even play sport. Like, is that even something I can do? I don't see the people that led me to Christ playing the same
Yeah,
sport as me. So maybe I can't play
right.
this sport. Like, I think when I think that is something that everyone's doing, or not everyone's doing, but to some extent is happening. And on top of that, you have last time we talked a lot about the work that it takes to contextualize, and so then you have sloppy missionaries who aren't doing that work of
Yeah.
trying to understand the context that they're doing, and they are just coming in with, well, this is what I know, let me share with you what all about me, and follow me and do what I do. And I think to your point earlier, Alessandro, too, oftentimes people then think, oh, then that means I should be a missionary. I can't tell you how many people got saved in youth ministry. And then I'm in Bible college, and all of the youth ministry majors, I'm asking them, so why do you believe you should be a youth minister? Well, I don't know. I got saved in youth ministry and it's just been impactful in my life. And it's like, well, that's awesome. And I'm glad for that. But maybe God wants to do something else with you too. And, you know,
Right.
but I think it's that thing that we're shaken so much that we start to look for,
Mm,
what is okay, what's
right.
not. And,
And our
um,
allegiance changes, right? New birth. I love that you brought that up, Jesse, but also like new king.
yeah,
Jesus is king now. So we have a new authority in our lives. And that new authority tells us to honor and respect the local authorities and to, it doesn't lead us to total anarchy. It leads us to a better sort of way of living within our cultures. But we have this new king, and I think as Jesus is king, yeah, you're right. if you've never met another believer, and then the one believer you know is a missionary who speaks this language and dresses this way and has this career, it's easy to conflate all of that into saying, well, this is what it must mean to be a follower of Christ. So, as the ones bringing the message, I think we have to be really careful um, to make sure that we are making disciples of Christ and not disciples of us.
Hmm.
So if I make someone who just ends up doing everything I do, maybe I've made a disciple of Jenn versus a disciple of Christ. And if I can keep pointing the people that I'm leading to faith to Jesus and saying, what is he asking of you? What has he put in you? How has he designed you? Where has he placed you in the world? And how do you grow more like Christ? And I'm going to be alongside you growing like Christ myself. But sometimes, one, it's kind of flattering when people want to imitate you.
Yeah.
Two, sometimes we're not even aware ourselves that's the message we're sharing, that this is what it looks like to be a Christian, and we're not offering other perspectives and other examples and broadening the scope of people's understanding of how we can follow Christ.
And just celebrate the things, like helping celebrate people for what they're doing, their passions or things. And that was for me for like rugby. It was like I actually had people like the missionaries that led me to the Lord actually came to a game and they were cheering for me. And so I was like, oh, okay, maybe this is okay. And I started wrestling with the question and asking them. So
No, I was just gonna say, I think something to realize is also to kind of to draw lines. Kind of, we talked at the beginning, right? We talk about what are some things we adapted. Maybe some things don't need to be adapted. Some things that's ours, that's yours, that's not Jesus. You can keep that. You can keep that, and we both have it. Where we see missionaries
Mhm.
sometimes they do the not, instead of forcing, they try to adapt and they actually do harm because they are thinking that they're um, bringing sort of like equality, but what they're really doing is that they are affirming maybe some things that they shouldn't be doing. I'll give you an example. When I first came to this church, there was a young lady who, during the summer season, she was again, I'll just use the word, she was dressing a little bit too exposed, and so I just talked to her. I had a conversation with her. But what's crazy was that, oh, we had missionaries come that I actually knew, and they were dressed like that for Sunday service. Again, this is not a podcast about how to dress for Sunday service. It was just a conversation. But what was interesting is I knew these missionaries, and I said, "Oh, trust me, they would never wear those in their church. Never. I know that church, they would never." But because they felt like they were in a different country, they could do that. And so it was just interesting how sometimes we really just have to humble ourselves and realize, I think the most important thing is we have to know that we have influence, or if we do have influence, we have to know that we have influence, and then realizing that, hey, I'm sharing you about Jesus, I hope that's influencing you. But this, the way I eat my meal, you don't necessarily have to copy. We have to kind of help people understand that. And I did want to ask a
Right,
question. um, Maybe it's
right.
the ignorant question, sort of like, oh, today we don't have, for example, slavery, but yes we do. And what about this idea, today we don't have colonization, so we don't have to talk about this anymore, this is a thing of the past. But obviously, I'm being facetious here. Like, can you guys talk about that? Like, I want to hear like more about this idea, like how do we see this today played out?
Um, I don't know if you guys remember, like, if you ever saw these on social media, but there were like white Barbie, um, saviorism sort of memes that were so funny because they imitated what you saw all of the time, which is, this 16-year-old white girl on a mission trip holding little black babies. And basically, I think it's this idea that we make ourselves feel good and powerful because we're going and helping the poor, weak, and the vulnerable, but there's not really any sense of, um, there's no real sacrifice. You go for 2 weeks, and who doesn't love holding a baby? And what good have you really done at the end of the day? But what we've done is we've perpetuated this idea of white saviorism and how a privileged white person can feel good about herself. rather than really entering into real suffering for the sake of another. And I think those sorts of images are still perpetuating some of the ideas, and that's like the hangover from colonialism. Like, we have things figured out. You need our help. These sorts of ideas that I think are harmful um, to those who bear the image of God all over the world and have so many strengths and values to offer and contribute to the conversation. I think even of conferences I go to where the global south is highly, even though they're global conferences, they're highly underrepresented because resources are so skewed in terms of who can afford to get on the plane and pay for the hotel to be present. And so then those voices are still not at the table and not contributing. And it's not because they don't have valuable experience and wisdom and insights and
Well, they just need to
even
learn to get
resources
money.
right, or even resource. They do have even resources, but the resources are different than those that are required to have a seat at the table. And so we value, monetary resources over other types of contributions.
I just think it's funny
Um,
that we're saying that. Sorry if I jump in, Jen, real quick, but it just dawned on me as you were saying that, like, much of the global south is where colonization happened. And we came in and we, took
got richer.
their land and got richer off of them. And then now that they're believers and have something to say and don't have the resources, just I don't know, the irony of this
Goes
conversation.
back to the Desmond Tutu quote, that Alessandro was talking about. They are holding the Bible and we're holding the land. And it's, in figuratively speaking.
Yeah.
So I think we need to keep talking about this and striving against it. One is because if we don't face the past, we're doomed to repeat it. And in fact, I have some evidence, and it's more anecdotal. It's not real data, but of missionaries from what were previously receiving countries of missionaries like South Korea and Brazil, who are now sending lots and lots of missionaries and yet repeating some of the same mistakes that were made when missionaries went to colonize them. So this is what we're talking about. They're imitating those who brought them to Christ, the good, but also some of the bad and some of the ugly. So I think we have to talk about it and be willing to look at the whole picture. I think we tend to either, want to totally condemn all mission efforts as the evil white man exploiting, or just talk about, well, no, we built schools, we built hospitals, the missionaries did good things, versus living in that tension that says, let's analyze it appropriately. Let's come to terms with what wasn't done well and wasn't done wrong. And where we can, let's make reparations. Are there places we need to go back? Like, the Truth and Reconciliation Council in South Africa, or there's been a similar program in Canada where churches and believers have reached out to Native tribes to ask for forgiveness and own wrongdoing. I think we want to gloss over that step as believers. We're so full of a reasonable love of grace and forgiveness. And we know that God can make all things new. And so sometimes I think we skip the step of repentance and jump right into I'm forgiven, or I wasn't the one who did that, it was our ancestors or whatever, versus figuring out, are there still places we need to go and repent and recognize some of that. I also think that we have to realize that I am still being transformed as a missionary. I don't have it all together. God's working in my life, and as I minister, my brokenness, my sin, some of my messed up motivations are going to be coming to the surface. And I either have to let God purify me of those, or I'm going to continue to repeat some of these mistakes. I think even my own ways of being paternalistic, of being patronizing of the people that I've come to serve, prejudices that come out of me and that rear their head in me. Do I do I bring those to God? Do I confess them? Do I ask God to transform them? Or do I just try and squish them down and ignore them and act like they're not there? I think we have to be willing to come to terms with the reality of those things as they live in us. I mean, I have really dumb examples, but I remember once I was looking for mentors for French missionaries, and someone had recommended someone, and I was trying to find him on Gmail, and I'm looking up his email, and the picture comes up, and it was a black man, and something in me said, "Oh, that must not be him." I don't know why. Well, I mean, I guess I do, but I don't want to admit it, right? I don't want to be a prejudiced person. I know that's yucky and gross and wrong. And it was indeed the person I was looking for. And he was a fabulous mentor. And the missionary that he mentored is now serving in his church and alongside him. And they have a great fellowship and a great community. But I mean, I get tears in my eyes as I tell you guys that, because I hate that about me. Hate that was my response. But I have to be able to come to terms with that for God to purify it, for God to redeem it, for God to cleanse me of it. And even to speak those things out is hard. But I think if I don't do it, I become a colonizer. I don't know if you guys have anything to add there before I go to the last point.
Yeah, I mean, well, thanks for sharing that, because that is hard, like you said. The only thing I was going to add is, well, for those people that don't know me, since our podcast is audio, I am mixed, African American and Italian German. But anyways, I would say for me, what's been kind of hard is even knowing how to do the repentance and how to receive when people come to me and say oh, I'm they're repenting for slavery or something that that they felt like they should tell me about. And sometimes it's hard to know how to handle, because the whole thing is
I
just
imagine
messy and difficult, and I think there is something like we just kind of want to move on or avoid, but there is I agree, Jen, there is healing in acknowledging and I guess the only other thing I wanted to add to this is the idea of stewardship and being self-aware enough to know, what I know it's a kind of a buzzword, but what privileges you have and how you can steward them for the benefit of all. I think of Acts 2 when it talks about the church and they brought all their things together and they're taking care of each other. Now, that doesn't have to necessarily be physically, I go to Alessandro's house with, a U-Haul and all of my house possessions and we figure out how to share them. But if I can learn how to steward in the things I have for the benefit of all those in the church, I think that's what we should be striving for. So,
yeah, that's so good, because really privilege is what it is, right? I didn't choose it. But I have it. And so what I do with that is the question of stewardship. And I agree, Jesse, that's what I have to do. And and even just being sensitive to sometimes what we want to do with it, like with that story I just told you, I didn't need to apologize to anyone. I didn't need, like, part of me, it would have been more helpful if I could have externalized it. But actually what I had to do is sit with that brokenness and say, God, you saw that and I saw that. Nobody else in the world saw that. That thought, that feeling, whatever happened there, nobody saw that but you and me. But we can agree that that was ugly and that was wrong and that I don't want to stay there. And I need your help to figure out how to be set free from that bondage and from that ugliness and that sin. And sometimes that's harder than if I can say, hey, here's $10, or hey, some way to to just make it right, so to speak.
Yeah.
I can't make that right because it's me that's not right. I'm the problem. And again, this brings us kind of to what I think is the biggest issue that we have to deal with. You know, a lot of millennials and Gen Z are questioning if missions is even a godly pursuit. Having been made aware of the failure of missionaries, there's a strong resistance to participating in the Great Commission because many believe that it can be more harmful than good. And the tendency I'm noticing among mission communities is to point at this reality as a weakness and a failure of the next generation, and to kind of get mad, like, oh, they don't understand the importance of the good news, or they don't have a genuine experience of Christ if they don't see the real value of evangelization and missions. But I think that's the wrong approach. I think we better listen to their concerns. I think we better hear them out. I think we better even validate what's wrong and invite them in and ask for their help, and continue to look for those ways to repent, both individually and corporately, and even as if necessary and possible, find ways to make reparations. But that's the hard work.
Yeah, I
And
would
it starts
say,
with me.
I was just thinking about, you know, a good strategy is to um, beat up someone and then sell them to slavery, and then make sure there's a famine, and then make sure that that person somehow makes it to the top, and then somehow God can use that. Wow, where did I get that from? You
That
know,
sounds
Joseph
familiar.
understood that this is not right, but God used it. Um, those things are not right, but God used it. What was the right thing? That God had said something, which is to go and make his name be known. That was the Old Testament. But now in the New Testament, it is from the Great Commission. And so the Great Commission doesn't then get erased because of all the wrong. We have to go back to the Great Commission and understand how we can do that right. And some were doing it right, and some today are still doing it right. So it's always that. I always love that quote that can be used for other things, but you know, bad theology doesn't get replaced with no theology; it gets replaced with good theology. And so we shouldn't just go and erase and then not do anymore what God has called us to go and be missionaries, to go and bring the mission or bring the message.
Well, I think we could probably keep going. I mean, now we used a word, the R word, reparations. That could really open up a whole nother labyrinth of discussion. But let's go ahead and stop it here, and just kind of take this back to the idea that, you know, this idea of doing missions with, and with means, you know, with everybody, with God, with the people where we're serving, with our critics, and we have a lot to learn from them. And if we take a humble posture instead of a defensive posture, then we not only have the opportunity to learn, but also we open up a opportunity for a discussion, a dialogue. And so this has been great. It's been really good. I mean, we went everywhere from duvets to talking about reparations and colonization in the middle. So it was really enjoyable, and glad to have been able to be a part of this. If you are listening to us, please follow us on Spotify, share a comment, share this with a friend, and yeah, we would love to receive feedback. So you can go ahead and shoot us a message through Spotify about how this is shaping conversations for you, or things that you would like to hear us discuss. But we look forward to hearing from all of you through Spotify, I guess. Thanks for listening to Going podcast, where we talk about going where God is at work.